Welcome to the High Bar.
Great talking to you.
Did you write that down on a piece of paper?
Your weekly watering hole for lighthearted conversation with people who care about culture that matters. I'm Warren Etheridge, your host and barkeep. I promise never to cut anyone off while encouraging all to think responsibly.
Just like you have to really listen.
But Jose, good question. You know, but that kind of was. That's a good question.
Join me today at the Elegant Volterra in Seattle, Washington, as I welcome legendary sci-fi writer William Gibson as we raise a toast to and raise the bar for atemporality. Welcome, William Gibson.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us here in this atemporal bar. You talk about having grown up in a small town in Virginia that deeply distrusted modernity.
Yes.
Is your speculative writing a form of postponed rebellion?
I don't think it's postponed. My rebellion probably began at around age 15, although, you know, at first I was careful to keep it a secret. But, you know, shortly after that, I was gone from that little town and really never came back. So I don't think it's not postponed, but I think it's informed, certainly still informed by the experience of growing up in a really, really tight monoculture where basically there were only Christian white people.
And then you moved to Arizona for that school, right? Which was also a monoculture, wasn't it?
It was less of a monoculture. There were kids from all over the United States. There were some non-Christian kids, and that was novel. Like, you know, my hometown, there were no Jews. I mean, it was seriously a monoculture. So I got to know Jewish kids in Arizona and Mexican kids, like you know, affluent Mexicans whose parents were sending them to boarding school in the United States.
Well, the thing that's curious, I mean, you're known as a futurist, or somebody who can certainly, I don't think you would say see ahead, but can predict the future to a certain extent. But you also seem to have a very strong nostalgic streak.
Well, time goes both ways, and both science fiction and history are, in their different ways, speculative projections on what will happen and what has happened on either side of the ever-progressing and infinitely narrow present moment. So I don't actually think of myself as a very nostalgic person. I distrust nostalgia. There is invariably a very powerful element of nostalgia in all fascism, for instance, and indeed in all conservatism, hearkening back to a previous golden age when things were as they should be. And I think it's probably biologically just something that's in us because we're born, get old, and die. So when we look back at our youth and go, oh, that was when it was really great. But you can see people, if you read back into history, you can see people doing that all the way back as long as we've had written literature. The Greeks passionately mourning the loss of the old ways thousands of years ago.
Well, you say that time moves both ways, but you also say in this book at one point that time moves one direction and memory moves the other direction, right?
Yeah.
And you also talk about prosthetic memory. Mm-hmm. And is prosthetic memory something that is actually increasing our nostalgia or actually taking away our memories to a certain extent?
I think that I don't actually make a distinction myself between memory and prosthetic memory. This idea of prosthetic memory, I think it's something that we've been doing since literally before we knew how to build things. We did it when we told stories. The stories was around campfires. The stories were structured in such a way that they became easy to remember, and they became the narratives and the myths of a particular culture. Then we were painting on cave walls, and all of these things involve a level of technology. I mean, when people talk to me about technology today, I often get the feeling they think it's something you buy at the Apple store. But, you know, a hand axe is technology. Knowing how to raise, harvest, and store cereals is a really crucial sort of technology, without which you can't really have a city. Hunter-gatherers can't do cities. And if you don't master sewage infrastructure on your cereal-based city, eventually everyone in it will die of cholera, and it will become a plague-haunted ruin, which has happened to a whole lot of cities. So we live at the top of a pyramid of technologies, most of which we take absolutely for granted. Sewage infrastructure, the fact that we don't have cholera.
But at some point here, you suggest that we're not really inventing that much new stuff, or that it is just stuff at this point, that we've sort of plateaued, and that there will be no more evolution.
Well, I mean, we do seem to have brought our own biological evolution to a halt, which is remarkable. I think, you know, we seem to be the first species on the planet that we know of to have accomplished that. It'll be interesting to see where that's going. Meanwhile, our stuff is literally evolving thousands of times faster than we are. And so somewhere up the way, we're probably gonna meet our stuff and have to sit down and have a talk with it, because it will be at least as smart as we are, if not smarter.
Am I going to be dating Siri on my iPhone at some point?
I don't know, but I think that Siri, you know, Siri might be the last person that a lot of people talk to, speak with in their lives, which is kind of a spooky thought. I mean, imagine living your life with Siri, you know, the next 30 years or however long, while Siri evolves and becomes more human, in quotes. That'd be very strange. I mean, you know, people having to say goodbye to their personal digital assistant on their deathbed. It'll happen. Yeah, I mean, it's strange to think, but I'm sure it will happen.
That'll make us all polyamorous in some way, though, because we'll all be dating Siri, won't we?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think that's a bit like the interpretive fallacy in literary criticism, the idea that there is a text or that there is a Siri, whereas I think it's much more sophisticated to recognize that each reader or each person who speaks with Siri completes the text or Siri in a different way. And you know, it's a big part of the nature of romantic love is our projection of our stuff on the other. So anyone falling in love with Siri is actually falling in love with an element of themselves which they're projecting on the form,
right,
which has been going on forever. I mean, it's all about things that we've been doing since we've been here as a species, and things that we've never done before. And we have both of those things going on very, very strongly now all the time.
So are you saying that Siri, sort of like, as you say about books, exist in that place between the writer's subconscious and the reader's response?
Yes,
yeah?
Yes. I mean, one person's Siri is not another person's Siri.
Right.
There's no text. I mean, you can. It's interesting to look at Siri as a literary artifact, animated, responsive, but a literary artifact. Someone wrote the code, and perhaps Siri changes with the conversation. Like one person would ask different questions. That would be interesting to see, like to see what one person's Siri is saying as compared to another very different
Right.
person.
Well, in theory, Siri is learning, right? So she may have different responses
Yeah.
because she's intuiting something from the user.
But does Siri learn to anticipate the user's needs, or does she learn to anticipate a sort of generalized,
Right.
generic user? I don't know. And I actually haven't had any I was about to say hands-on, but that's not right. I haven't had any conversations with Siri myself. I've only read ones people have put on the internet as being notable, some of which are extremely funny.
I have had no exchanges with Siri. The love of my life is a very jealous person, so I don't go that route. I want to go back to the prosthetic memory thing for a second, because it's fascinating to me, this idea of letting others carry memory. And I have found that as technology progresses, my own memory seems to be failing me more and more. Which
I don't think I could say everything you just said myself, and it would be true for me. But the conclusion I've come to is that I'm prosthetic. The public prosthetic memory has allowed me to repurpose a lot of brain activity that I previously needed simply to remember stuff. Right. Like I can now use all the memory in the buffer for something else, and it does make me stupid in certain practical ways. Like I don't spend any time remembering my own schedule, right, because it's available on the prosthesis instantly at any time, and actually more accurately than I was ever able to remember it. So I like to think that work, that kind of mental work has been freed up for something else. That's purely interpretive on my part.
Well, that sounds great, but what is the trade-off for you? Like, if you're not remembering your schedule, did you come up with an idea for a great novel this morning?
Well, I don't think. The interesting thing about that is I don't think one can know. I don't think we can know. An increase, tiny perhaps, but a tiny increase in personal bandwidth isn't. I don't think it can't be evident to the one who's experiencing it, because we are the bandwidth. We have nothing to compare it to. So in fact, we can only see it in the, if you like, memory deficit that seems to come with allowing your telephone to remember all of your appointments. And as we come to have more anthropomorphized versions of the personal digital assistant, I think that will become more extreme, like the little demon on your shoulder that tells you need to get your teeth scaled, and remembers your wife's shoe size, and all of those things. I don't think we'll necessarily be able to. I don't think really that we can measure what that might be giving us.
Well, it's weird because it makes certain sense to have our phone numbers and appointments taken care of that way, but it seems like we're outsourcing more and more of this information that we used to keep in our heads. And just neuroeconomically, there's the idea that no memory or no notion really sets except for 7 years later, if you've been repeating it to yourself.
Yeah.
If we are now outsourcing our memories, like photos and stories put on blog posts, and not actually taking the time to remember the stories ourselves, are we cheating ourselves of some sense of time and history?
Well, I think really that what happens is things change and we lose something. Simultaneously, often we gain something. And that is the nature, and has always been the nature of life, of being an incarnate entity. Things change. And as either Baudelaire or Rimbaud, and I'm cursed to never be able to remember which, said, the city changes faster than the human heart. And it's always, I think it's always been that way. I mean, we can ask ourselves the question that you're asking, but the other question is, if we're losing something and we care about it, what could we possibly do about it this late in the game?
It's too late now?
Yeah. I think it is too late. I think we have become that which does that. Just as previously we became that which could record and listen to music, which is just literally if you consider the entire history of our species, the ability to record music, to record moving images, it's such a thin little wedge on the timeline that it's invisible. It's like a zillionth of a hair. We've barely been doing it for the blink of an eye, and yet already we are incapable, I believe, of imagining what it was like to be human prior to the advent of recorded music. Right. About once a year I try to imagine that, and I always fail. It's interesting now that there are a couple of wonderful, enormous, obsessive collections of the earliest examples of recorded music that we know of. And they've been cleaned up digitally from their scratchy Edison wax disc state, and they sound unutterably weird. They sound as though Martians were recorded. And I think that's because the musicians and the singers you hear on those records had never in their lives heard recorded music, nor did they know what they themselves sounded like. They had no way of ever hearing themselves. It's like a very strange thing, and it's lost to us because we have become something else.
So you're saying we do lose something in that process. That recorded music is great because we get to hear that stuff, but we also lose something.
We do.
We lose a finite quality or a depth for the music.
We do. We do lose something, but I don't, maybe I'm just being philosophical here, but I think we lose something, but I don't think we can thereby say, oh, that's a tragedy. Right. We've lost something, because in losing it we've gained something else. It's the nature. It seems to me to be the nature of existence, and the nature of a given human life. But we're talking about the life of a culture or the life of a species, and we don't really have the option of going back. Just that we don't have the option of being younger. It's something on that order.
So is atemporality a good thing then? This idea of living in sort of a timeless present?
Well, I think that, I'd say 30, 40 years ago, the now was a couple of years long. And it's gotten shorter. It's gotten shorter ever since, as we've come increasingly to live in a world in which our experience has been that the meaning of everything can seem to change for us instantly in the light of a particular event. It can be an event that is a very short duration, and it seems to change. It seems to change the meaning of everything. And in that experience, you now shrinks to this sort of tiny a moment that barely exists, and it moves forward constantly in expectation of everything changing because of some essentially random driver. And that model of reality does not afford the space of now, the long now, on which writers like H.G. Wells, Robert Heinlein, or Isaac Asimov constructed these huge, elaborate arcs of extrapolation into imagined futures. They could do that because they had a big now to build it on. And our now is just a quark-like blink today, and it's just, I think, excuse me, I think it would be unreasonable to expect people to be able to extrapolate in that way. By the time they finish the book, the world will have changed so much that the now they extrapolated from is no longer the present.
So you just have to write faster.
Yes, I mean, if you could kick them, but the idea of the thing that I find interesting about atemporality is that we can use it to cut ourselves a sort of slack against the narrowness of our now. We can stage dress a longer now and place it both behind us and ahead of us. Yes.
That sounds positive to me.
Yes.
Is there also an upside to that, if we think about Eastern religions or philosophies, that people are actually more capable of living in the present than they ever were, living in the now?
I think people are, yes, I think so. I think we're, the world today requires us to be, in some ways, present. On the other hand, though, our world has become post-geographical to the extent that we aren't necessarily where we are physically. So a person who's physically in the moment in Seattle can actually be interacting with someone in Bangkok in effectively a different moment.
For you, when you dream, do you dream of the future now, or do you dream of your past?
I don't think I really dream of either. If you mean literally, like dreaming while asleep, I dream of the Dreamtime place where it's neither past, present, nor future, but its own.
So
its
truly
own
atemporal time.
Yeah, its own various continua. And my dreams tend to, the ones I remember, tend to make me think that they almost all have entirely different directors. They're not very consistent in form or texture. And I guess I'm lucky that way, but I never know what I'm going to get.
As long as you have good directors, I think you're fine. Not the typical Hollywood experience, but a good one.
No.
Well, thank you so much for giving all readers a lot to dream about, a lot to think about, and thanks so much for sharing all of your nonfiction work here, not all of it, and Distrust that particular flavor.
Oh.
Very enjoyable. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
In his collection of nonfiction, distrust that particular flavor, legendary sci-fi writer William Gibson suggests that we are the strange species that constructs artifacts intended to counter the natural flow of forgetting. It's what he calls prosthetic memory. Now, far be it for me to argue with Mr. Gibson. I think he's right. And that said, I've taken a personal vow to take fewer pictures and fewer notes, because unless we give ourselves the opportunity to forget what we're experiencing, we can never fully live in the moment. Cheers.